All right, let's just jump right in. Picture two completely different worlds. Over here, you've got the GRC world, governance, risk, and compliance. You know the drill. Annex A, audits, endless checklists. And over here, you've got DevOps. It's all about pull requests, pipelines, and moving fast. For a long time, these two worlds, well, they haven't exactly been on the same page.
But what if there's a way to bridge that gap? What if they could not only meet, but actually work together? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. This is all about compliance as code and how the brand new ISO 27001 update from 2022 is basically the key that unlocks this whole new way of thinking. So here's our game plan. First, we'll talk about the problem, that classic compliance bottleneck that slows everyone down. Then we'll get into the good stuff, how the new ISO standard is a total game changer. We're going to define what compliance as code actually is, show you how it works in the real world, from a policy doc to a pipeline, and wrap up with why this is such a massive strategic win.
Okay, let's kick things off with the big problem, the one that probably feels painfully familiar to a lot of you out there.
It really is a tale of two different speeds, isn't it? On one hand, you have compliance teams who are drowning in spreadsheets, Word docs, and manual reviews. On the other, engineering teams are pushing code to production multiple times a day. So what happens when these two worlds collide? You get a bottleneck. Compliance starts to feel like a roadblock that's just slowing down the entire business.
So, what gave? What changed? Well, the catalyst for all of this is the recent update to the world's biggest information security standard. It's a huge deal.
Look, if you've ever touched the world of compliance, you know ISO 27001. It's the gold standard. But here's the thing. The old version was written for a pre-cloud, pre-CI/CD world. This 2022 update, it's a massive leap forward. It's been completely redesigned to speak the language of today's automated cloud-native tech stacks.
And this right here, this is one of the biggest aha moments in the new standard. They took the number of security controls from a pretty intimidating 114 all the way down to a much more manageable 93. And this isn't just about making the document shorter. It's about cutting out the noise, reducing the complexity, and making the whole thing way more approachable. And those 93 controls, they're now grouped into 4 really simple, logical themes: organizational, people, physical, and technological. This just makes so much more sense. It's way easier to figure out who owns what, and it aligns perfectly with how modern security and engineering teams actually think and work.
So why is this so important? Here's the key. The new standard is way more automation-friendly. It focuses on the outcome you need to achieve, not the specific, rigid method you have to use. So instead of saying, you must use this specific tool, it says, your data needs to be protected. And that little change, it opens up a whole world of possibilities for engineers to get creative and automate their solutions.
All right, so we've got this new modernized standard that's basically built for automation. Now let's talk about the big idea this enables. Compliance as code.
So what is it really? Simply put, compliance as code is all about treating your compliance rules the same way you treat your application code. You write them in a file, you check them into version control, and you plug them right into your development pipeline. And the magic here is that the security controls are checked automatically. And, get this, the proof you need for an audit is generated every single time you run the pipeline.
This changes the game for everybody. If you're a GRC analyst, you're no longer the Department of No. You become an enabler, helping engineers build the guardrails right into the system. And if you're a DevOps engineer, hey, compliance is no longer this thing that gets thrown over the wall at the last minute. It becomes a real-time, automated part of the system that you actually build and own.
So the shared mission here really boils down to 3 things. 1, we translate that dense, human-readable policy language into code, rules a machine can understand. 2, we let the pipeline do the heavy lifting of enforcing those rules. And 3, we generate our audit evidence all the time, with every build, not just in a mad dash once a year.
Okay, theory is great, but how does this stuff actually work in practice? Let's roll up our sleeves and look at the playbook for getting this done.
Let's start with a really common requirement from ISO 27001 around access control. You know, the policy basically says, hey, you got to control who can access your systems, and you have to protect things like passwords and API keys. It tells you what you need to do, but it leaves the how up to you.
And this is where the rubber meets the road. That high-level policy gets translated directly into technical actions within the CI/CD pipeline. We're talking about things like using infrastructure as code to enforce role-based access control, writing a test that fails the build if multi-factor authentication isn't enabled for admins, or scanning for hard-coded secrets. And the best part? Each of these automated checks spits out the evidence an auditor needs, the config files, the test logs, the scan results, it's all right there.
Now, this all sounds fantastic, right? But it does make you wonder, what happens if you don't do this? What are the real risks of just letting your high-speed pipeline run wild without these checks?
Honestly, the best way to think about it is like taking the brakes off of a race car. Sure, you'll go incredibly fast for a little while, but you know a crash is coming, and the fallout is predictable. You deploy insecure infrastructure, you push vulnerable code out to your customers, you fail your next audit, and, ultimately, you start losing business because nobody trusts you.
So this brings us to the final and maybe most important piece of the puzzle. When you get this right, it isn't just about avoiding bad things. It's about turning compliance from something that costs money into something that actually makes you money. It becomes a strategic advantage.
First off, you get way better at spotting risks early. You've probably heard the term shift left, and this is it in action. Instead of finding a security flaw in production, which is a 5-alarm fire, you catch it the moment a developer tries to check in bad code. A fix that takes 5 minutes at that stage could save you thousands, maybe even millions down the road.
Second, you are always ready for an audit. You know that frantic last-minute scramble to pull together spreadsheets and screenshots for the auditors? Yeah, that's gone, forever, because every single time your pipeline runs, it creates a perfect, time-stamped, audit-ready report. The evidence is always there, on demand.
And what this leads to is a huge cultural shift. You stop thinking about compliance as this painful thing you do once a year called audit season. It just becomes a living, breathing part of your daily operations, where you're proving you're compliant with every single code deployment.
And finally, this becomes a massive business advantage. Think about it. When a big potential customer's security team comes knocking, you don't just hand them a dusty policy document, you can show them a real-time dashboard of your security posture. That builds an incredible amount of trust, it makes sales cycles shorter, and it helps you win more deals.
So if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. Modern GRC isn't about some separate team throwing rules over the fence anymore. It's about building compliance, security, and trust directly into the very code that runs your business. That's the future, and that's what compliance as code is all about.